You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Radio MMT respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land from which we are broadcasting, the Wurundjeri people, and we are broadcasting to the Kulin Nations. Our focus is economics, that is, how stuff is produced and distributed. We recognise that for many tens of thousands of years, First Nations people's connection to country successfully embodied the world's oldest continuous economy, which was catastrophically disrupted by genocide and displacement. We acknowledge that we have much to learn to reshape our current extractive and exploitive system to achieve sustainable prosperity for everyone.
Radio MMT. Economics for the rest of us with Anne
and Kev.
Radio MMT.
Looking at the world through the lens of modern monetary theory.
Radio MMT. Macroeconomics for a well-being economy.
Macroeconomics? Isn't that incredibly boring?
No, Kevin, it's incredibly interesting. It's all about who gets what and why.
Who gets what and why? Okay, I'm in.
RadioMMT@gmail.com.
Incredibly interesting macroeconomics for the rest of us. Welcome to Radio MMT. You're here with Anne and Kev, except we haven't got Anne this week. Anne's taking long service leave for October, so we have James. James from the Monday morning radio show, James?
That's right, Monday morning and the Sporting Record. Anne said Anne wanted to have it go on a little break, and I said, this could be a chance for me to flex my economics muscles.
Yes, well, Anne sent a photo to me a little while ago of you sitting at reception reading a book called Macroeconomics, which is basically the MMT handbook. You know, it's a handbook. And without any prompting from us, didn't come from us whatsoever, and she almost fell over. And she said, there's another one, like a homegrown MMT within 3CR.
Yeah.
So, of course, she grabbed you and had a conversation with you, etc. And here you are today, filling in.
Here I am. I've come a long way.
So I'm interested in your journey into MMT. How the hell did you end up sitting at the reception desk of 3CR with an MMT handbook, the macroeconomics handbook, in your lap?
Yeah, well, as all things, it's a long story. So I started my life out of school studying a Bachelor of Commerce at Melbourne Uni.
Yeah.
Took some economics classes, and at first I was really interested. Started with microeconomics.
Rightio, yeah.
I thought, okay, I can get a hang of this. Went into macroeconomics, and then the thought dawned on me, excuse the language, this is a bit bullshit.
Yeah.
This doesn't seem right.
You know, this is a really common story because we've spoken to a lot of people who have studied economics. And I think in one of the first shows we did, we spoke to somebody who had this consistent message coming back to us that people who are doing the conventional orthodox neoclassical economics course at universities all around the world sit there and go, this is a load of bullshit.
Yeah. And that was my thought, and I had no idea about economics. I thought, understanding how the world works, because economics is so big, that'd be great. So then I went into studying marketing and management, because those are the two easiest things I could do. The idea was, I could just graduate and get a job and make a lot of money. Fast forward, I start working in marketing, have the crisis that this is actually pretty unproductive. This is kind of damaging people too. You know, you're exploiting people's nervous systems and psyches.
It's kind of like a test of your character, and I think you passed because you obviously, if you weren't a good bloke, you'd probably be still doing marketing.
Yeah, so I took some time away from that, discovered the climate change problem, and realised, okay, this needs my attention. This needs my effort. So then I enrolled in a Master of Environment, with a focus on policy, governance and markets, which is kind of the economics stream.
Yeah.
And that basically laid out all the problems, particularly neoclassical economics and neoliberalism, but didn't offer any solutions.
Right, okay.
So they touched on ecological economics a bit, which is really good for diagnosing the problems, but doesn't necessarily have a way forward out of it,
right,
in my view. So then I decided, okay, I came across the idea of a well-being economy.
Right.
I was searching for some sort of framework to make sense and move forward on this economics path.
And because we hear this term "wellbeing economy," it was one that Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand tapped into a bit, and even Jim Chalmers, our current treasurer, before he became treasurer, was dropping this phrase of a wellbeing economy. And in economic terms, it's an interesting phrase.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
So the idea of a well-being economy is that the economy is for people and planet. It's not people and planet for the economy. It reverses that around. And then the idea of what well-being is struck me as really interesting.
Yeah.
Because what the bloody hell is well-being?
Yeah.
You know, the idea hinges on being. You know, what the bloody hell is being? We still don't know that.
Well, a neoliberal, what would you call it? Definition of well-being would be being rich.
Yeah,
and that's about it. Like it's really is that simple. The whole neoliberal model is based on maximising your economic potential, which is basically to say maximising how much money you can store away, how rich you can become. So that's the model of economics that we currently subscribe and use worldwide in the Western world. It's based all economics is based on maximising your wealth. It's capitalism captured by neoliberalism and distilled into this very simple, really simple form, which does not. If that's all it takes to be well is to be rich, it's a pretty flawed definition of being well.
Yeah, definitely. And the idea that the more stuff you have and the more money you have, the better off you are. There's a slight element of truth in that, because in today's world, you do need a lot of income to do the things that would achieve what well-being really is. You know, a lot of therapy, a lot of help, a lot of work, a lot of investment in yourself.
Yeah, there's also a requirement to earn a certain amount of money just to survive, you know, and we see that under attack all the time. We've seen rents go up, we've seen houses move beyond the capability of many people to buy them, and so the ability just to exist in some sort of stable framework is becoming harder and harder. So I guess if you're talking well-being past that, there's a minimum entry level into capitalist life to cover these basic things. But yeah, governments don't really consider much else.
No, they don't. So I started a PhD on this idea of well-being adjacent to the well-being economy, trying to figure out, okay, what really is well-being if you can sum it down to a framework or an idea. And then what do governments think well-being is?
Yeah.
So I started doing that. Then I come across, all the critiques of neoclassical economics, which is the mainstream economics.
Yep.
Came across the work of Steve Keen.
Yeah.
Australian economist who's been trying to debunk mainstream economics his whole life.
Right. Now he was ahead of the game on the GFC, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was one of the few economists who predicted there would be a massive collapse of the financial system.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like he was spruiking a random idea. He had reasons that were pertinent and that married with the facts to predict the GFC. So that's a good reference in, isn't it? I mean, if you're going to speak to if you're going to follow an economist, speak to somebody who's got an outstanding track record.
Yeah, I mean, when Queen Elizabeth, I think, learnt about it, she asked, "Why didn't we see this coming?"
Yeah.
And some did, and it's worth listening to those people. So I dived into his work, and he came out with a new book called The New Economics recently, which is a manifesto for a new paradigm of economics. It's starting to emerge. And he had a quote in there, which I took to heart, which I'll just read out.
Sure.
He said, "The most important alternative approach to economics that you should learn," and this is me as a student trying to learn.
Yeah.
He said the most important are post-Keynesian economics, modern monetary theory, and a thing called biophysical economics.
Okay. Well, I know post-Keynesian, I know modern monetary theory.
Yeah.
Biophysical economics.
Something to do with systems and energy and thermodynamics. Is crazy stuff.
He's a real systems guy, and Steve Keen. He's like he understands systems. I struggle, I got to say.
I'm not a systems thinker yet.
No,
I'd like to be.
Yeah.
So I looked at those three and thought, okay, biophysical economics, that's out of my pay grade. I don't have the skills for that. Post-Keynesian, very technical. All right, I'll dive into modern monetary theory.
Right.
So I bought the Stephanie Kelton book, The Deficit Myth.
Yep.
And that just changed my whole perspective on how money works and the economy and how governments could operate given this tool. Modern monetary theory, it's a tool for how to, I guess, govern better or more effectively.
Yeah, look, she's a very good communicator, Stephanie Kelton. She does what we would like to do, which is distill down the economic techno talk into something that people can understand. And she does that very well.
So this is me, who studied a Master of Environment, which is basically a crash course on how all the things in the world are not going well at all.
Right.
And talking about deficits and how that's actually a good thing. That blew my mind. And then at the end of her book, in The Deficit Myth, basically said deficits help make progress. So now it's the idea of what do we want to progress towards if we use modern monetary theory as a tool. And she highlighted a couple. So government deficit will help us restore or work on other deficits. And these are the good jobs deficit, the savings deficit, the healthcare deficit, the education deficit, the infrastructure deficit, the climate deficit, and the democracy deficit. So in my mind it goes, all those things I learned in my Master of Environment about how the world's going wrong, this tool, modern monetary theory, is a way to repair that.
Right. So your introduction to modern monetary theory, we see you sitting behind the desk at 3CR. It's just been this, and this is often the case. It's something pricks your interest. You hear something that makes sense, and I haven't come from an academic background at all, but you hear a politician or somebody talking about something that you know something about, that you don't quite understand, and you don't understand it because it doesn't make sense. And so much of our economic framework doesn't make sense. And then you hear something that goes, hang on, that actually does make sense. And one thing leads to another, and next thing you're hooked.
Yeah.
If you've got an inquisitive mind, some of these things you just go, right, well, there's an answer that I've been waiting for quite some time. There's something which makes sense. I've heard MMT described, I think when we were speaking to who was speaking, Alan Kohler from the ABC just recently, and he was saying that MMT is descriptive, not prescriptive.
Right.
Now, it was interesting speaking with Alan because he spent 50 years as an economic journalist, a finance journalist. He is well researched, he's well read, but he is. His roots are in neoclassical economics. That's the language he's been speaking and talking and working within for years and years and years. And to see him come across to a more progressive mindset, it's been an interesting journey. So he's what I realised after speaking with him is that he's almost there. He's still got a foot in the orthodox camp.
Yeah.
Because it would be very hard to step away from something that has been indoctrinated into you for 50 years.
Oh, wouldn't it? But
he's self-taught, and so he's always searching for new concepts and new ideas, etc. So he says it's MMT is descriptive, not prescriptive. But what I would say to that is that if you have an MMT understanding of the economy, you are in a good position to start writing the scripts to fix the ailments that you could write. You could be far better at prescribing solutions if you understand the problem properly in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of agree with him. And I hear this a lot from different sources. There was another fella. I have such a bad memory for memories and stuff. There was another leading economist, Nicholas Gruen.
Right.
I had the fortunate circumstances to work as a handyman. So I'm working for this guy. I don't think you'll mind me using his name, Michael Short. And I was fixing some stuff around his place. And he was a senior editor with The Age. And I'm fixing stuff, and I'm telling him about MMT, and he's kind of going, "Yeah, rightio, nutjob. What are you talking about? Blah blah blah." So we're sitting down having lunch one day with a nice bottle of white. There's a good thing about working for journos is that they make nice ham and cheese sandwiches washed down with a nice bottle of Chardonnay. It was quite nice. And as we're speaking, he gets a phone call and he goes, "Oh, sorry, I have to speak." And it's Nicholas Gruen on the phone. And Nicholas Gruen's saying to him, "Look, why aren't you reporting this?" And blah, 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 blah. And he said, "Hang on a second." He said, "Listen, I've got this fella sitting across from me, and he's talking about," I didn't say MMT. He said, "He's talking about this thing about blah, blah, blah." And Nicholas Gruen said, "Oh, righty, he's talking about MMT, right?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "Well, what do you make of that?" And he goes, "Well," he said, I don't prescribe to any one economic camp, but if I had to, it'd be MMT."
Wow.
And so you hear this all the time. Any trained economist or anybody who understands it, they like the framing of MMT because it explains the way our economy actually works after all of the years of gold standards and currencies and fixed to the US dollar and blah, blah, blah. Then you have a fiat currency, and finally it distills down to what we have in the modern age. And by modern, I'm talking about the last 50 years. You have an understanding which looks at everything else and then explains it, how it's shifted focus, how all these terms that we've heard have shifted their meaning, or maybe not even shifted their meaning, how they were always supposed to be understood. And I know this sounds kind of airy-fairy and the rest of it, but once you understand something, you can't un-understand it. You know what I mean?
You know. If you know, you know.
Yeah.
You know.
Once the mystery is taken away and you have an understanding of the machinations of a system, you go, well, I understand how this works now. You can't tell me that it works some other way.
Yeah.
You certainly can't tell me it works another way and without explanation, when I have a firm understanding of it and expect me to change my thought process. And so you've obviously come down that journey.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then I borrowed the macroeconomics textbook from the library not long ago.
I saw that. You've got an RMIT stamp on the top of it.
Yeah,
I'm so happy that like they're in their library. That's fantastic.
They got 2 copies there.
Yeah.
My copy is dreadfully overdue.
Right.
So I'm probably going to incur a fine.
You can borrow mine. I've got one in the van.
Oh, okay, great. I'll pay you a fine, Kev.
No, you just have it and read it at your leisure.
Ah, thank you. So it's very dense, the macroeconomics textbook.
Yeah.
But just to have this thing that says, okay, we're going to take an MMT perspective to the whole economy, talk about what they do at the moment, and then here's another way of thinking about it, is just so validating.
Yeah. Yeah, and what I do enjoy about the textbook is you can actually bomb in and out of it. Like I started reading it from start to finish, and I'm not a good student, James. I've got a certain attention span. Sometimes I have fits and bursts, so I can read something, and it's good, and then I get distracted, and I need to do something else. But that textbook, I've found that I can pick it up and jump in, go ahead, jump back, go back in again, and it helps me understand. I go, right, there's a term comes up and I go, I don't understand what that term means. And I look through the index and find it there, and they'll be in a number of chapters, and I go, right, good, okay, get my head around it. So it's a good reference book in that term. Sounds like we're plugging it, but I'm not. I'm just telling you my experience with this book over the last couple of years. It's,
it's a great book, and that's what textbooks are for.
Yeah.
So reading the textbook and learning about MMT, in learning about the environment and about inequality and all these things that I did, there are so many great ideas already out there of how we can fix this.
Yeah.
The problem always is, how do we pay for it? And I was talking to Michelle Maloney, who is the founder of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Australia. And she's been an advocate, an activist for a long, long, long time. And she said, the thing that always gets in the way is the economists. So
this whole point about how do we pay for it, this is something that we're going to come back to in a short time to investigate, because it's a massive bugbear with me. It's where if there's one thing that anybody listening to this show or anybody who understands economics needs to get their head around, it's how do we pay for it. And after we play a song, we'll come back and tell you.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM. Visit the 3CR website at 3cr.org.au/podcast to hear the most recent recording from each show, or 3cr.org.au/streaming to listen live.
So we just heard from the Beastie Boys, Groove Homes. Are you a fan of the Beastie Boys at all?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah, remarkable.
Would you pick that as a Beastie Boys?
No, I wouldn't have. But I could say the Dust Brothers are the producers of the Beastie Boys. They
Right.
make a lot of their beats, and it sounds very Dust Brothers-y.
Yeah. Well, as it turns out, the Beastie Boys are actually all accomplished musicians, not just definition of accomplished musicians. Who knows what that is?
Yeah.
But yeah, they brought this really smooth album a little while ago, and I find it a constant resource of appearing to be sophisticated.
Yeah. Hey, you do what you do.
Yeah. I wonder how Anne's going. Anne, I wonder if Anne's even listening. Anne, if she's supposed to be listening to this show, I reckon she should not be listening. She should just be totally removing herself and taking the break that she said she would. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in case you haven't guessed, you're on Radio MMT, normally with Anne and Kev, but this week we have James Tate, who is another announcer on 3CR who has an interest in what do we call it, modern monetary theory as well. Yeah. So which is great. See, this is kind of proves the point that it's about slow change, about a movement that is slowly seeping into society, and I think what's quite disheartening for a lot of people who can see change, want radical, quick change. Never happens that way.
No,
it's a slow movement which is slowly creeping into society through economists like Nicholas Gruen and commentators like Alan Kohler, and we know that there's politicians, particularly in the Greens and the Labor Party, who understand MMT. They're not allowed to talk about it because it's seen to be radical, crazy talk, but we know that they're out there. So, and you're part of this movement.
Yeah. Well, it takes a long time for culture to change, and that's kind of what MMT is going for. You know, you can change your actions overnight. You can change structures fairly quickly with the right idea. But culture takes a while for it to really sink in, doesn't it?
Well, and we're going to touch on this later on because I don't know whether you noticed in the news at all, but there's a referendum on tomorrow and talking about change and the pace of change, etc. And I have some thoughts on this, which we may, if we have time later on the show, talk about it. I'm sure everybody's so happy to hear more and more talk about the referendum, but we'll get round to that. However, before the break, before we went to the Beastie Boys, we were touching on the subject of how do we pay for things.
Yes.
Now, this is, if there's one thing that I reckon everybody needs to know, that when you hear the line, we can't afford it, government hasn't got enough money, we need to raise taxes, and nobody wants to raise taxes, therefore we just can't afford it. This is a line that comes from both sides of politics, from the Labor Party, from the coalition. They're always sprouting this line. We just can't afford it. I think Jim Chalmers was talking about, look, we can't even afford the good ideas. And there's this perception that the government needs to pay for anything by raising taxes, and if it can't raise the taxes, then it can't pay for anything. If there's one message that any listener could take from this show, government is not beholden on taxpayers to spend anything. The government is not restricted by its tax revenue to pay for government spending. And we see this. We see this all the time. We see it with submarines. We see it with COVID spending. We saw it with World War II. We see how a government in any particular situation can always somehow, not magically, but through the system that is actually in place, raise the dollars that are required to pay for emergency expenditure, but not just emergency expenditure, any expenditure. And I guess this is probably one of the largest hurdles that people have with understanding MMT is we tell them that tax and government spending are not connected, that they're disconnected. Your thoughts?
Well, for me, it's just the idea it's just a simple question of who creates the money. Where does money come from? And the answer is, well, the government does it. And the bank does it a little bit. But the government creates money. How much money can they create? They could probably create as much as they want or need. The only thing that they need to be careful of is inflation. And if you control for that, and there's lots of ways to do it, in essence, the government could pay for just about anything. And that's the big thing with MMT is, okay, well, if there's only the limit of inflation, what could we do? We could do so much.
Well, yeah, like this, it's all these social programs are held up. We've seen just recently there's a housing shortage, and I'm going to talk through this one a bit. The Labor government presented the idea of having a housing fund, a housing future fund. So the concept behind that scheme is that they invest $10 billion. I can't remember how much it was. An amount of money, billions of dollars, into investment portfolios, and the profit that they make from that investment would pay for the new housing projects. And so there's a perception there that they can't actually just pay for it straight, that they have to have this investment portfolio, this fund, to raise the revenue to build the houses. And the Greens kicked up a fair amount of fuss over that because the Greens are more progressive although they didn't say it straight, they know that that's not necessary.
Yes.
They know that the government didn't need to pretend to have make profit from a fund to pay for the housing, but they could just do it directly. They could just summons the contractors, will draw up the whatever tender processes there were, and once the tender processes are out there, they just pay the builders. They pay the supply companies. Now you're talking about inflation. If they do that in an environment where there's not enough builders, where there's not enough building supplies, and they're competing for scarce resources, that'll be inflationary. And that's the inflation you're talking about. Yes, they have unlimited capacity to spend, but if you're spending into a market which is depleted of resources, you're going to push the price up because you're going to need to compete against other people and pay more to get that builder, to get that concrete, to get those diggers, and so that's the inflationary impact that you're talking about. So where before you did say they only have to consider inflation, well, inflation is actually a consequence of the environment into which you're spending. And it's not only inflation, but inflation is the big one.
That's the big one.
And you hear this quite often. If the government just spends, and it's just printing money and just spending it into the economy, it's going to cause inflation. That can happen. And they need to be aware that that spending into an economy which does not have the resources to have the money spent on, if they're buying a scarce resource, yes, it will be inflationary. But if it's not, it's all good. And we know this because they just spent how many billions of dollars on submarines?
250, 300.
Yeah,
I've seen many numbers.
Because there's plenty of submarines around, and so that's not a scarce resource. So
it's always funny when you talk about healthcare or welfare. It's always inflationary. When you talk about war spending, no, it's necessary. It's not inflationary.
Yeah,
and you think, oh, geez, really?
And people. I don't know how people don't understand that. They go, oh, we can't build more hospitals because it's going to be inflationary, and they never question the submarines.
No.
There's a term for that. It's called social. I don't know. Anne's good at this sort of stuff.
Anne's good at terms.
Where's Anne? It's a social disconnect. No, it's called a cognitive disconnect. I don't know what it is. There's a term for it.
Cognitive dissonance. Is that
that's the one? See, you're just as good as Anne.
Hello.
Excellent.
I'm in.
I'm not very good with this sort of stuff. I need academics around me because they have all the right terms. So cognitive dissonance. So people are just so used to thinking of things in a certain way. It's drummed into them. Like, this is how we do it, this is how we do it, this is how we do it. And then when you explain to them that doesn't make any sense, they go, no, it does, because that's how we've always done it. And you just go, oh, come on, just think a bit more than that. So that's the inflationary effect of government spending willy-nilly into an economy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Whenever the inflation comes up, alarm bells go off in my head and go, ooh, inflation. I'm worried about that. But when you put it in the MMT context, that yes, inflation is a thing, but it can definitely be controlled and we can still pay for things, then that makes me breathe a bit easier.
Yeah. So it's a question, and like we say, if it's this ability, I think this is the main message that MMT could send to the whole of the community, and I don't know how to phrase it. Maybe we can work through this. Bit of a workshop here, James. How do you explain to a community that's been brainwashed into thinking that their taxes are required before government can spend into the economy. And it's kind of interesting because at the same time that the whole of society has been brainwashed into thinking that taxes are required, so as if money comes from from people like you and I, and we have to go and find that money from somewhere, and every piece of currency that you find will have on it somewhere written Reserve Bank of Australia. So we understand that the money actually does come from government, but we think that it doesn't come from government and that we need to give it back to the government so that they can spend on stuff.
Yeah.
How do we simply tell them that they don't need that's not how it operates, and that they don't need to? This is where I have trouble.
That is tough. And my budding academic brain immediately goes to definitions.
Yeah.
A lot of our definitions of these major things in our life, like government, economy, tax, they're pretty muddy.
Yeah.
You know, if you ask, what's a government? People go, oh, ooh. So in my head, I've been trying to redefine things based on the different lenses, you know, the MMT lens and the Wellbeing lens and stuff. So for me, when I think about government with an MMT lens, I think of a government as they do three things when it comes to work. You know, governments make work happen because we all live in a society. Because in theory, when we live together, we live better in terms of a society. So for me, a government enables work. It creates the conditions in which work can be done. It can make work happen. So it can contract certain people to build bridges or, you know, create dams or things like that.
Yeah.
And it can also shape the direction of work. So where does all this work that we do together go in the economy? So, and how do they do that? Money and institutions. You know, money, modern monetary theory. Institutions, the rules of the game, formal and informal. So that's my little spiel on governments.
So you're saying that governments create the regulations around work, and the reason we're saying work is central to this is because work is what we do, and a lot of people define themselves by their work. I've always fought that, but so you have government creating the conditions of work. You know, we live in Australia. Australia was one of the first countries to adopt the 8-hour day, the 40-hour week. These are conditions of work, heavily influenced by the Labor Party, and always fought by the coalition because they're a bunch of mongrels and they want us to work more and more for less and less. But so there's the battlefield: is workers wanting to work less for more, and the owners of industry, the capitalists, wanting us to work more for less. So there's the conditions of work. When you're talking about the government actually creating work, this is also another neoliberal battlefield because post-World War II, we had the H.G. Coombs, the Nugget Coombs white paper on work on employment in 1945, and they've only just released a new white paper on work. It's only just come out. This is the first one since 1945, and Labor have just brought it out. And look, I need to have a look at it because it's crucially important. But the Nugget Coombs white paper said that the government needed to create jobs, create projects that would employ the returned soldiers and then a lot of the immigrants that came to Australia afterwards. And then, of course, the neoliberals would say, well, government shouldn't be involving themselves in that sort of activity. That should be left to the private sector. And so you have that struggle there. You've got the Conservatives saying, government, get out of the way, leave that to the private sector. We know what we're doing. You guys are just a bunch of incompetent, hopeless people. And so there's that one. Now, what was the third one you said there?
It shapes the direction of work.
Shapes the direction.
Where is all this work going in the big scheme of things?
Right.
You know?
So how does... Well, I've had this discussion with Anne before, and I reckon it's kind of, it pushes it to an extreme. And this is kind of like the UBI conversation where you just give people money for doing nothing, which I know Bill Mitchell is very much opposed to. And I put the proposition that if you paid somebody to dig a hole and then you paid somebody else to follow through and fill that hole so that the net productivity is zero, the effect that has on the person who is digging or filling the hole gives that dollar more value than if you just gave them a UBI, like
Interesting.
a straight dollar. And that's really taking it to an extreme. So it's non-productive work. There's nothing to show for the work except that the person working has a sense that they're earning, and a person on a UBI doesn't. It's kind of like, and so it's a different mindset when you receive payment. And that does something to the way we value a dollar.
Yeah, well, that comes to the sticky definition of what value is as well. From my perspective, I'm working with the idea that value derives from well-being in some way.
Yes.
With a very broad definition of well-being.
I think this well-being thing is really important. So, yes, speak more.
Yeah, so, I mean, talking about what well-being is tough because well-being means such different things to different people, different cultural groups. So we can't say what well-being really is because it means so many different things, but we could probably think about well-being as a general idea.
You know what, James? I'm liking what you're saying, but for my well-being, I need to give my brain just a small little rest so that we can come back to talk about this with a little more attention, a little more attention
vigor.
Span. I think, am I turning into like a millennial with a... Anyway, what we're going to do, we'll take a short break and we will shortly come back and talk about this concept of well-being. You're with Anne and Kev on Radio MMT.
At 3CR Community Radio in Melbourne, Australia.
And wherever you get your podcasts.
Economics for the rest of us.
Rows and flows of angel hair and ice cream castles in the air and feather canyons everywhere. I've looked at clouds that weep, but now they only block the sun. They rain and snow on everyone. So many things I would have done, but clouds got in my way. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's cloud illusions. I recall I really don't know clouds at all. Moons and Junes and Ferris wheels, the dizzy dancing way you feel as every fairy tale comes real. I've looked at love that way, but now it's just another show. You leave 'em laughing when you go, and if you care, don't let them know. Don't give yourself away. I've looked at love from both sides now, from give and take, and still somehow it's love's illusions. I recall I really don't know love at all. Tears and fears and feeling proud to say I love you right out loud. Dreams and schemes and circus crowds. I've looked at life that way, but now old friends are acting strange. shake their heads. They say I've changed. Well, something's lost, but something's gained in living every day. I've looked at life from both sides now, from win and lose, and still somehow it's life's illusions I recall. I really don't know life at all. I've looked at life from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's life's illusions I recall. I really don't know life at all.
You're listening to 3CR 855 AM on digital and on the internet, www.3cr.org.au.
So during the break, we heard from Joni Mitchell. I like playing Joni Mitchell on the radio because she doesn't put anything on Spotify. She's kind of like in the Neil Young camp, where she went anti-Spotify for a while. And I just find Joni Mitchell a rather amazing kind of musician and person. She describes herself as an artist now. She paints and she doesn't sing much anymore, and she's become a bit recluse, etc. But I think she has an excellent mind. And that was her song, Both Ways Now, which basically goes along the theme that the more you learn, the more questions there are to answer, and the more you ask, the more questions there are. It just keeps going, never stops.
Definitely.
And I hope she's doing well, because she had some serious health issues just recently, but she played earlier this year, I do believe, for the first time. So her well-being is hopefully good.
It's on the up, at least, we hope.
It's on the up and list. So speaking of well-being, you were saying?
Yes. So the idea of a well-being economy, or using well-being in our governance, is something that's getting pretty popular right now.
Yeah.
I know there are 6 countries around the world that are trying to become well-being economies, full stop.
Who?
New Zealand, Scotland, Wales, Finland, Iceland, and Canada.
Canada.
Yes.
I like all those. I like Iceland. I like Canada. I like New Zealand. Scotland depends.
My family's Scottish descent, so I was born to live on the highlands, throwing rocks and stuff.
Yeah, I'm a bit scared of the Scots, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, so those countries are committed to a well-being economy.
Good. So what are you talking about when we're talking about a well-being economy?
Well, an economy that is totally built to enable people to have well-being. The problem is we don't really have a good idea of what well-being is, in theory.
Right.
So we all have the idea of a good life, of quality of life, but what that really is, and whether we can universalize that so everyone has a model of well-being, is difficult because it's culturally different. So every culture, every place has a different version of what well-being is.
So it's got to be nuanced to your local environment.
Yeah. So it's got to be place-based, essentially. So well-being is 2 words put together, well and being.
Right.
We don't really know what being is. You know, the entire history of philosophical thought is trying to figure out what being is.
Don't get in that rabbit hole. Idea. That's that could go anywhere.
Yes. So in my work, and I will say that I'm on a leave of absence from my PhD right now, just to do some other things, like learn about MMT.
Yep.
In my mind, being is a process, right? Being, it's continuous.
Right.
And as humans, and as all life, we're always developing. We're always moving in some sort of direction. We're always becoming something. So being, in this sense, is kind of that black box between what you have been and what you will become.
Right.
You know, it's this space in the middle.
Okay.
And that's us right now. We're always being something.
Right. So you're talking about the intersection of the past and the future.
Yeah, in this present moment.
Right.
So in that sense, I view well-being as a quality of development.
I like this talk.
Yeah, it's a quality of development. So how are we all developing?
Yeah.
Because every single thing that happens in our lives, the body keeps a score. It all, us in the present moment is from the past of many decisions and environments we live in.
I've just turned 60, and my body has a fairly pronounced scorecard at this stage.
Right? It builds up. So when we talk about well-being in an economy, it kind of aligns with these ideas of sustainable development to a degree. Sustainable development does have its flaws, but it's this idea of healthy and sustainable and just development.
Right.
That's my understanding of what well-being is. So when you try to get a government to say, okay, we're going to do well-being now, but a country as big as Australia, for example, that has lots of different places.
That's many different things for
lots of different cultures.
I recall just recently when who was it that said that it was a lifestyle choice for Indigenous populations to live in the outback? That was Abbott, I think.
Yeah,
and he said, "Oh, well, that's a lifestyle choice. And you might have to reconsider your lifestyle choice." So he's obviously his concept of well-being is very deficient.
Yeah,
because you're talking about people who. Their well-being is connected to country, is connected to place, is connected to history in a location, a place that they know and love and feel connected to. Abbott in this instance is arguing the very base, simplistic, neoclassical idea that if you can't afford to live there, then you should live somewhere else.
Yeah,
and disregarding everything else. What you're saying is that you need to take into consideration the effect of the environment will have on you, your place in community, your place in this instance in country, and all of the factors that are around that. The factors that if you're a human being who wants to feel well within yourself, not just physically but mentally as well, and mental health is becoming a massive issue. These are the indicators of how an economy is working. Remembering that the basic definition of an economy is we're not talking about money, we're talking about the distribution of resources. And if you listen to the beginning of this show, we make the point that this was the longest continuous functioning economy in the world, 65,000 years of being able to live in a place and live well in a place, live with well-being in a place. And there's a lot to be learnt from that. So this is what we're talking about with well-being. It's not just how much money you've got. It's how you function as a human being.
Yeah. So, a lot of things go into well-being. Academics often silo it into little portions, but if you bring it all together, well-being is a holistic idea. So your economic well-being, your emotional well-being, your physical well-being, your mental well-being, your social well-being, just sort of your entire life, how is it going? How is it developing? And that's based a lot in culture. So how you feel, how you should function, how you relate to the world is often derived from a culture. So for Indigenous people, for example, they've got a very, very different mode of well-being than what neoclassical economics says well-being is. Neoclassical economics just says it's about maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain. The old Jeremy Bentham utilitarianism.
Right.
And neoclassical economics itself has no understanding of culture, does not work with that at all, and its model of human beings is very flawed. It's very oversimplified.
Well, like neoclassical economics describes its base unit as the economic rational man. And its idea of as well as you can be is to maximise the economic potential of of basically essentially a greedy, lazy man.
Yeah, and you're selfish and you're rationally selfish, and that's all you do. You work for yourself and that's it. And we all know that altruism, that debunks the entire thing.
Yeah.
So when we talk about well-being of different cultures, when we think of the voice vote coming up and having an Indigenous voice in Parliament and in the Constitution enshrined, that is essentially saying that, okay, this group of peoples in this so-called country have a very different understanding of what it is that makes them live well, and thus they should have a say in affairs that concerns them so that they can realise their well-being in their way.
Yeah, it's we've gone there. We've gone into the referendum talk.
Yeah.
It is on tomorrow, so it was always going to creep into this discussion somewhere. Look, I know it's a contentious issue here at 3CR, and it's contentious because we have two factions who basically agree that something needs to be done, that not just something, that a lot needs to be done. And we have one group of the progressive no vote who are saying that the voice is inadequate, and that it's just an excuse to siphon off concerns into another toothless body, and therefore the concerns that they have won't be heard. And what's more, this voice will be used as a smokescreen to sideline grassroots movements. We then have the other side, and I've got to say, I'll say it openly, I'm actually a yes campaigner. I do understand and agree with the progressive no side, but call me a naive, hopeless optimist. I think that the voice could be a small step in the right direction. And just from my understanding of how politics plays out, and I look to neoliberalism for a model here, and that's going to raise some heckles. But we've come to live in a very neoliberal society because of small, imperceptible, incremental steps that have been taken by the neoliberals who to control things, where just small step by small incremental step, we now find ourselves in this really neoliberal capitalist world.
Yeah.
It's very different to what it was 40 years ago. And so from this, I've learnt that change is longer lasting if it's done in smaller bite sizes. And so for that reason only, I'm a yes campaigner, because I think that this could be a small step in the right direction. And I fully get the progressive no campaigners who say that it's too little, it's toothless, it's pointless.
Yeah.
But, like I say, I'm a naive, optimistic white guy. I haven't lived that experience. All I can do is reflect my own perspective on that one, I guess. And so that's why I do it. And I also understand this, that when you're on the left, quite often the lefties, or progressives, I should say, they have the same objectives, but they spend all their time fighting on how to achieve it. And the objectives are often lost entirely because of the brawling that goes on about how to best achieve something. And maybe I'm guilty of being part of that process by taking the position I'm taking. I don't know. But look, I will say this. We understand that the distribution of resources in this country is vastly different now to what it would have been 300 years ago. And if there's one thing I would love to be standing where I'm standing right now, 300 years ago, and understand how this place worked, how it was, because I get called being idealist on a bit of an idealist on this, and people say, it couldn't have been that great and it was quite primitive and all that sort of stuff. The things which resonate with me is that there's no history in First Nations people of slavery, imprisonment, torture, weapons of warfare.
Yep.
Their disputes seem small scale and domestic. And generally speaking, it doesn't matter what your history is. If there's major events along those lines, there'll be a record of it. But there doesn't appear to be. And so, to me, that seems to be... And when you think about it even further, you've got 300 different language groups, no central government, all acting as autonomous collectives. Like, it's pretty hippie.
It's beautiful.
So I don't know. But anyway, look, I don't know. This is the thing. And I don't know, and I'd like to find out. And if there's a voice that can inform me, I'm all for it, I guess.
Yeah, it comes back to the definition of politics that I like, which is it's just about who gets what, where, when, and how.
Yeah.
That's what politics is all about. And economy's linked to that. So it's how we work together, given that. The Wellbeing Economy Alliance defines an economy as how we care for and provide for one another, which is a really nice definition. And so if the voice gets up, then that could be a way so that First Nations people can get a bit more, get what they want, where they want it, how they want it.
Yeah.
And thrive a bit better.
I get the point from the Progressive No campaign that say this was a Dutton government, they'd just sideline this, they'd defund it, and it would be toothless and pointless. So it really does depend on the government to a large degree. And so there's valid points, but there is one, and I've been manning polling booths all day, there's one thing we can't ignore. Australia is still a very racist country, and there are a lot of small-minded people out there, and I've been watching them all week, and that is a problem. So anyway, look, we've gone off topic, James, and look, it's been wonderful having you on the show this week.
Great to be here.
We touched on wellbeing, and we need to go there further, and so we'll do that in 2 weeks' time when we're back here again, because Anne is having a holiday. Can't believe it, Anne. Just taking time off and leaving us do all the work. Fair enough. No, that's good. It's good. She's looking after wellbeing, and that's very important, James.
That's the most productive thing you can do.
So anyway, we've got to go because Vicky's coming up next with Mafalda. See you in a couple of weeks. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Radio MMT with Anne and Kev.
We'd love your feedback. Email us on radioMMT@gmail.com or search Radio MMT on social media.
Listen to this show anytime, wherever you get your podcasts, or on 3cr.org.au/Radio MMT.
Support this show and the station by subscribing to 3cr.org.au and mention Radio MMT.
We thank all our guests,
and we thank economist Professor Bill Mitchell and his mmted.org, educating the masses on modern monetary theory.
and thank you to our listeners for listening. And I thank you, Kevin.
And I thank you, Anne. So what's planned for next week?
Kevin, there is still so much to talk about. We've got to expose all this rotten economics.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.